A black boy from a rental apartment claiming his daddy's a four-star general? That's the most ridiculous lie I've heard in 23 years of teaching. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore doesn't whisper it. She announces it to the entire fourth-grade class at Jefferson Elementary. Then she snatches Lucas Hughes's carefully written assignment off his desk and rips it in half. The tearing sound echoes. She rips it again. And again. The pieces fall like snow onto Lucas's worn sneakers. You don't get to make up fairy tales about being special, Lucas. Generals live in big houses. Their children go to private schools. They drive expensive cars. Her voice gets colder. They certainly don't show up looking like, well, like you. 10-year-old Lucas stands there, frozen. His hands shake. Every kid in the room stares at him. She crumples the torn pieces and drops them in the trash. Pathetic. Have you ever watched a teacher destroy a child for being black and telling the truth? 2 hours earlier, Lucas Hughes woke up to his father's voice calling from downstairs. "Breakfast in 5, soldier!" The Hughes family lived in a modest 3-bedroom apartment in Arlington, Virginia. Close enough to Fort Myer that you could hear the morning bugle if the windows were open. The furniture was clean but worn. The walls held family photos, but nothing that screamed military family. No uniforms on display, no medals in frames, no flags or plaques. Security protocol. General Vincent Hughes didn't advertise what he did. In the kitchen, Lucas found his dad sitting at the table in jeans and a Georgetown sweatshirt. To anyone passing by, he looked like a regular father, maybe a teacher, maybe an office worker. His mother, Dr. Angela Hughes, poured coffee in her scrubs. She had an early surgery at Walter Reed. On the refrigerator, a child's crayon drawing showed a stick figure in uniform with 4 stars on each shoulder. Next to it, a calendar with today's date circled in red marker. Parent Career Day, Friday. Lucas couldn't stop smiling. He'd been waiting for this day for weeks. Dad, can I tell them about the time you met the president? General Hughes glanced at his wife. Angela gave him that look, the one that said their son deserved better than secrets. Lucas, remember what we talked about? Some things stay private, for security. But everyone else gets to brag about their parents. I know, son. Vincent's voice was gentle but firm. Our family is different. We keep a low profile. You understand? Lucas nodded. But he didn't really understand. Not fully. Why did other kids get to be proud while he had to stay quiet? Angela squeezed her husband's hand across the table. He deserves to be proud of you, Vincent. I know. The general looked at his son. Just keep it simple tomorrow, okay? You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Lucas finished his cereal and headed upstairs to get ready for school. He didn't know that in less than 12 hours, simple would become impossible. Jefferson Elementary sat in the heart of Arlington. The school served everyone. Military families transferred in and out constantly. Diplomat kids whose parents worked at embassies. Immigrant families chasing the American dream. Working-class children whose parents cleaned the buildings where policy got made. It was supposed to be a place where every child mattered equally. But Mrs. Patricia Whitmore had taught there for 23 years, and in those 23 years, she'd developed a very clear sense of who was telling the truth and who was exaggerating. Her classroom walls displayed the American flag, photos of her shaking hands with local city council members, and certificates of teaching excellence. She wore her flag pin every single day. She'd never served in the military, never lived overseas, never worked a day outside of comfortable suburban classrooms. But she knew what generals' families looked like, and Lucas Hughes didn't fit the picture. During morning announcements, Principal Hayes's voice crackled through the intercom. Good morning, Jefferson Elementary. Reminder that Parent Career Day is today. We're honored to have some very special guests joining us. Please make them feel welcome. In Mrs. Whitmore's classroom, the energy shifted immediately. Tyler Bennett, a white kid whose father lobbied on Capitol Hill, raised his hand. Mrs. Whitmore, my dad's meeting with 3 senators this week about the infrastructure bill. How impressive, Tyler. Her face lit up. Public service is so important to our democracy. Sophia Wilson, a Latina girl whose mother cleaned the Capitol building, raised her hand next. My mom works there too. She cleans the offices after everyone leaves. That's nice, Sophia. Mrs. Whitmore's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Now let's open our textbooks to page 42. Lucas watched the exchange. He'd seen this pattern before. Some kids got praised, others got dismissed. It usually depended on what their parents did and how much money they had. At 10 o'clock, Mrs. Whitmore handed out the assignment. Class, I want you to write 3 paragraphs about your parents' careers. What do they do? Why does it matter? How does it help our community? She walked between the desks. Due before our guests arrive. Best handwriting, please. Students bent over their papers immediately. Lucas pulled out his pencil and began writing in careful block letters. My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army. He has served our country for 32 years in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Korea. He helps make important decisions to keep America safe. There are only about 40 4-star generals in the whole military. My dad worked his way up from second lieutenant. He says leadership means serving others, not yourself. My dad has been deployed 6 times. Sometimes I don't see him for months, but he does it because he loves our country. That's what makes his job matter. Deshaun Williams, Lucas's best friend, leaned over and whispered, Yo, is your dad really a general? Lucas nodded, keeping his voice low. Yeah, he just doesn't talk about it much. That's so cool. My dad just fixes cars at the garage. My dad says every job matters, Lucas whispered back. Your dad keeps people safe on the roads. That's important too. Deshaun grinned. Mrs. Whitmore appeared beside Lucas's desk. Her shadow fell across his paper. She leaned down and read over his shoulder. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Lucas felt his stomach drop. Something in her expression told him she didn't believe a single word. But she said nothing. Not yet. She just walked back to her desk and made a note in her planner. As the morning wore on, Lucas's phone buzzed in his backpack. The school allowed students to carry emergency contact devices. His was an old smartphone his parents could reach him on. He checked it during the bathroom break. A text from his mother. Dad's flying back early from Korea, landing at Reagan 3 p.m. tomorrow. He'll make career day after all. Keep it a surprise. Lucas's heart soared. His dad had been in Korea for 3 weeks. Some kind of strategic planning meetings Lucas wasn't allowed to know about. But he was coming home early. He'd be at career day. Lucas wanted to shout it from the rooftop. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his bag and returned to class. He didn't notice Mrs. Whitmore watching him from her desk. Didn't see the skeptical look in her eyes. She'd already made up her mind about Lucas Hughes. That boy was a liar. And tomorrow, in front of everyone, she was going to teach him a lesson about honesty. What she didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, a 4-star general would walk through her classroom door. And everything she thought she knew about Lucas Hughes would shatter like glass. The next morning arrived with unusual excitement at Jefferson Elementary. Parents began filing into Mrs. Whitmore's classroom at 8:30. A lawyer in a sharp suit. An architect carrying blueprints. A software developer. A chef in kitchen whites. A nurse still wearing scrubs from the night shift. Mrs. Whitmore greeted each one with varying levels of enthusiasm. The lawyer got a firm handshake and bright smile. The chef got a polite nod. The nurse got a quick, "Thank you for your service," before Whitmore turned to arrange chairs. Lucas sat at his desk, checking his phone every 30 seconds. His dad had texted at 6 that morning. Landed. Catching up on sleep. See you at school by 10. Proud of you, son. 2 more hours. Lucas just had to make it 2 more hours. Class! Mrs. Whitmore clapped her hands. Before our guests present, let's share the paragraphs you wrote. I want our visitors to hear how thoughtfully you describe their work." One by one, students stood and read. Tyler Bennett talked about his father's lobbying firm and the important bills they influenced. Mrs. Whitmore beamed. Sophia Wilson talked about her mother's cleaning work and how she took pride in making buildings shine. Mrs. Whitmore offered a tight smile and moved on quickly. Then she called on Lucas. "Lucas Hughes, you're next." Lucas stood. His paper shook slightly in his hands. He cleared his throat and began reading. "My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army. He has served our country for 32 years in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Korea. He helps make important decisions to keep America safe." Mrs. Whitmore's expression changed immediately. "There are only about 40 4-star generals in the whole military. My dad worked his way up from second lieutenant. He says leadership means serving others, not yourself." "Stop!" The word cut through the classroom like a gunshot. Every student froze. Parents looked up from their phones. Mrs. Whitmore stood slowly from her desk. "Lucas, come here, please." Lucas walked to the front of the room on shaky legs, his heart hammered against his ribs. "Class," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice taking on a teacher lecture tone. "This is a perfect example of what we call embellishment. Lucas, I need you to be honest with everyone right now. What does your father actually do?" He's a general, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed. "Lucas, I have been teaching for 23 years. I have met generals. I have taught generals' children." She crossed her arms. "Generals do not live in modest rental apartments. Their children do not attend public schools in worn-out sneakers. Their families are well connected in the community. There are official records. Social events. Recognition." Lucas felt his face growing hot. "But ma'am, my dad keeps a low profile because..." "Because of what? Secret missions?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm. Several students giggled nervously. Tyler Bennett raised his hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, maybe his dad really is..." "Tyler, I appreciate your kindness, but this is a teaching moment." She turned back to Lucas. "I checked with the office yesterday. There is no General Hughes listed on our parent registry. Your father's occupation is listed as government employee. That's very different from a 4-star general, isn't it?" Lucas's eyes filled with tears. "He puts that on forms. For security reasons. He told me..." "Enough!" The classroom jumped at her raised voice. "You will sit down right now. You will rewrite this assignment with the truth. And you will apologize to this class and to our guests for wasting everyone's time with fantasy stories. Do you understand me?" Tears spilled down Lucas's cheeks, but he didn't move. "Lucas, I said sit down. My dad didn't raise a liar, ma'am." The room went completely silent. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red. Several parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "What did you just say to me?" "My dad is a general. He's flying back from Korea. He'll be here at 10 o'clock. You'll see." Mrs. Whitmore's jaw clenched. "To the principal's office, now." Deshaun Williams stood up. "But Mrs. Whitmore, Lucas isn't lying. I've seen..." "Deshaun, sit down before you join him!" Deshaun sank back into his chair, shooting Lucas an apologetic look. Lucas grabbed his backpack. As he walked toward the door, Mrs. Whitmore delivered her final blow loud enough for everyone to hear. "Class, let this be a lesson. Honesty and humility are virtues we cherish. Making yourself seem more important than you are, especially when you come from certain backgrounds, is the opposite of character." Lucas stopped at the door. His hands gripped the straps of his backpack so hard they left marks. Every eye in the room watched him leave in shame. He had 90 minutes until his father arrived. 90 minutes to survive being called a liar in front of everyone. He had no idea that Mrs. Whitmore was about to have the worst day of her teaching career. The hallway felt longer than usual. Lucas walked slowly toward the principal's office. his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Behind him, he could hear Mrs. Whitmore's voice resuming the career day introductions as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just destroyed him in front of the entire class. He pulled out his phone. Still no new messages from his dad. Probably still sleeping after that 14-hour flight from Korea. Lucas thought about texting him, about telling him what just happened. But what would he say? That his teacher called him a liar? That nobody believed him? His dad had enough to worry about. Lucas didn't want to seem weak. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and kept walking. Through the main office window, Lucas spotted Principal Hayes on the phone. She was nodding seriously, her expression focused. She glanced at a folder on her desk, then looked up and made eye contact with Lucas through the glass. Her eyes widened slightly, like she recognized him. But she was mid-conversation, so she just gave him a small nod and returned to her call. Lucas wondered if Mrs. Whitmore had already called ahead to complain about him. Vice Principal Thornton handled the meeting. Principal Hayes was still occupied with her phone call, her office door closed. Mr. Thornton was a white man in his 50s who'd been at Jefferson Elementary for 15 years. He wore khakis and a blue polo shirt with the school logo. He had the kind of face that always looked slightly disappointed. "Sit down, Lucas." Lucas sat in the chair across from Thornton's desk. It was too big for him. His feet barely touched the floor. "So," Thornton began, opening a folder, "Mrs. Whitmore tells me you disrupted class and refused to correct false information in your assignment." "Sir, it's not false. My dad really is—" "Lucas." Thornton held up a hand. "I pulled your file. Your father is listed as Vincent Hughes, occupation, government. That's what's in our system." "That's what he writes on forms, sir, for security reasons. He's not supposed to—" "Security reasons?" Thornton chuckled. Not meanly, but like an adult humoring a child's imagination. "Lucas, I understand wanting your father to seem important. A lot of kids do that. But making up elaborate stories about generals and classified information—" "I'm not making it up." Lucas's voice came out louder than he intended. Thornton's face hardened. "Lower your voice. You're already in trouble, son. Don't make it worse." Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly. A text from his dad. "Running late. Briefing at Pentagon got moved up. We'll be there by 10:30. Hang tight." Lucas's heart leaped. He showed the phone to Thornton. "See? He's coming. He'll be here in less than an hour." Thornton barely glanced at the screen. "Lucas, I can't verify anything from a text message. You could have anyone's number saved as Dad in your contacts. But here's what's going to happen." Thornton leaned forward. "You're going to return to class. You're going to apologize to Mrs. Whitmore for being disrespectful. You're going to rewrite that assignment with truthful information. And then we're going to move forward. Understood?" Lucas felt his hands beginning to shake. "You don't believe me." "I believe you want attention, Lucas. I understand that impulse. Kids from single-parent homes or families where parents work multiple jobs sometimes create stories to feel special. It's a cry for help, really. My parents are married. My mom's a surgeon at Walter Reed. My dad—" "That's enough." Thornton stood. "Return to class right now, or I will call your parents in for a formal disciplinary conference, and trust me, you don't want that on your record." Lucas stood slowly. His vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. "My father serves this country, sir. He's been deployed 6 times. He's earned the right to be believed." Thornton's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. "Go back to class, Lucas." When Lucas returned to room 204, everything had changed. Parents now filled the back and sides of the classroom, sitting in a semicircle of borrowed chairs. Career day was in full swing. Mrs. Whitmore stood at the front, introducing Mr. Bennett. "So grateful to have these distinguished guests with us today. Mr. Bennett works with some of the most powerful people in Washington. Let's give him our full attention." Applause rippled through the room. Lucas slid into his seat as quietly as possible. Deshawn leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" Before Lucas could answer, Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut across the room. "Lucas, do you have something to share with the class?" Every head turned. Students, parents, everyone stared. "Ma'am? Your apology?" Lucas felt his stomach drop. The room went completely silent. This wasn't just his classmates anymore. There were adults here, professional people, watching him be humiliated. A 10-year-old black boy being forced to apologize for telling the truth. I don't have anything to apologize for, ma'am." The room gasped. Several parents exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked at Lucas like he was being disrespectful. Mrs. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Excuse me? In front of our honored guests, you're going to continue this defiance?" Tyler's mother, Ms. Bennett, a lawyer in a gray suit, spoke up gently. "Perhaps we should let the child explain. I appreciate your concern, Ms. Bennett, but classroom management is my responsibility." Mrs. Whitmore's smile was tight and professional, but her eyes were hard. She turned back to Lucas. "You have two choices, young man. You can apologize right now and rewrite your assignment with honest information, or you can spend the rest of career day sitting in the office while your classmates enjoy our guests. Which will it be?" Lucas's voice cracked when he spoke. "When my dad gets here—" "Your father is not coming, Lucas!" The words echoed through the classroom like a slap. Parents shifted in their seats. Some students looked down at their desks. Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice taking on a tone of forced patience. "Sweetheart, I understand this is hard, but the truth is, your father probably works a regular government job. Maybe at the VA, maybe at a military base doing paperwork. Those are perfectly respectable positions." She walked closer to his desk. "But you've created this fantasy about generals in Korea and important decisions because you're embarrassed. I get it. You see Tyler's dad meeting with senators, and you want your family to seem just as important." Her voice dropped, quieter now, but somehow more cutting. "But Lucas, there is no shame in being ordinary. The shame is in lying about it. Especially when you come from a community that already struggles with stereotypes about honesty and—" "Mrs. Whitmore," Ms. Bennett stood up. "I really don't think—" "Please, Ms. Bennett, sit down." The lawyer sat slowly, her expression troubled. Deshawn muttered under his breath, "This is so messed up." "What was that, Deshawn?" "Nothing, ma'am." "Deshawn Williams, I heard you. Office. Now." "But I didn't—" "Now!" Deshawn grabbed his backpack and walked out, giving Lucas one last look of solidarity before disappearing into the hallway. Lucas was alone now, completely isolated in a room full of people. Mrs. Whitmore stood over him, arms crossed, waiting for his apology. The other parents looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. The clock on the wall showed 9:28 a.m. His father would arrive in approximately 1 hour. But right now, in this moment, Lucas Hughes had never felt smaller in his entire life. He looked down at his desk, at the empty space where his assignment had been before she tore it up. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, and then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "my name is Lucas Hughes. My father is General Vincent Hughes. He's a 4-star general in the United States Army. He served for 32 years, and when he gets here, you're going to owe me an apology." Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed deep red. "Sit down." "No, ma'am." The room held its breath. "Lucas Hughes, if you do not sit down right now—" The classroom door opened. Principal Hayes stepped inside, slightly out of breath, her face flushed. "Mrs. Whitmore, hallway, immediately." The tone of her voice made it clear this wasn't a request. Mrs. Whitmore blinked in surprise. "Principal Hayes, I'm in the middle of—" "Now, Patricia." Every parent in the room noticed the use of her first name. That never happened. Mrs. Whitmore followed Principal Hayes into the hallway, the door closing behind them with a soft click. Through the small window, students could see them talking. Principal Hayes's face was serious. Mrs. Whitmore's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that looked like fear. Lucas sat back down, his heart pounding. Whatever was happening out there, it had to do with him. The clock ticked forward. 9:30 a.m. In the hallway, Principal Hayes kept her voice low but firm. "Patricia, we have a situation." Mrs. Whitmore crossed her arms defensively. "If this is about Lucas Hughes, I was simply maintaining classroom standards. The boy was clearly I just spent 20 minutes on the phone with Fort Myers Protocol Office." The words hung in the air. Mrs. Whitmore blinked. "Protocol Office?" "Yes. They called because we have a very distinguished visitor arriving." Hayes pulled out her phone, showing Whitmore an email. "They needed to confirm our security clearances, parking arrangements, and whether we could accommodate a security detail." Mrs. Whitmore's face went pale. "Security detail? For career day?" "For Lucas Hughes's father." The hallway seemed to tilt. Lucas Hughes?" "Yes, Patricia. The 10-year-old boy you publicly humiliated this morning for supposedly lying about his father being a 4-star general." "Oh my God." "The boy you sent to my office? The boy whose assignment you tore up? The boy you accused of making up stories because of where he lives and how he looks?" Mrs. Whitmore's hand went to her mouth. I thought he was exaggerating. He lives in that modest apartment complex. The father isn't on any social registers. There was no indication. Because senior military officials maintain low profiles for security reasons." Principal Hayes had never raised her voice at a teacher in 15 years of administration, but she was raising it now. "I have spent the last half hour on the phone with a very polite but very firm aide explaining why a 4th grader was called a liar for telling the truth about his father's service. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Through the hallway windows, both women could see movement outside. 3 black SUVs pulled into the school's front circle. Men in dark suits stepped out first. Secret Service or military security, Hayes wasn't sure which. They moved with practiced precision, scanning the area. Then, from the center vehicle, a man stepped out. He was tall, dignified, and wearing full military dress uniform. The dark blue jacket was immaculate. Medals covered his chest in neat rows, each one representing service, sacrifice, campaigns. On each shoulder, 4 silver stars caught the morning sunlight. General Vincent Hughes had arrived. Mrs. Whitmore felt her knees go weak. Oh, God, he's real." "Yes, Patricia, he's real. And right now, he's walking into my school to pick up the pieces of what you did to his son." Inside the classroom, students and parents noticed the commotion outside. "Is that the president?" one kid whispered. "Look at all those security guys!" Mr. Bennett, the lobbyist, stood and moved to the window. His eyes widened. That's a 4-star general." The room erupted in whispers. Lucas sat frozen at his desk. Through the window, he could see his father walking toward the school entrance with that calm, measured stride he'd seen 1,000 times. His dad was here, in uniform. Everyone was about to see the truth. General Vincent Hughes walked through Jefferson Elementary's main entrance like he was reviewing troops. Calm, measured, taking in every detail. The security personnel remained outside, per his instructions. This wasn't a military operation. This was a father checking on his son. Principal Hayes met him in the main hallway. "General Hughes, sir, I'm Principal Hayes. I want to apologize." He shook her hand firmly but briefly. "Principal Hayes, I appreciate you accommodating the short notice. I apologize for the disruption to your school day." His voice was professional, controlled, but there was steel underneath. I understand there was some miscommunication regarding my son's assignment. Behind Hayes, Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen, her face the color of chalk. General Hughes's eyes moved to her, not angry, just assessing. "You're Lucas's teacher?" Yes, sir, Mrs. Whitmore. General, I want to apologize. There was terrible confusion about... Confusion? His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. My son was called a liar, in front of his peers, for telling the truth about his father's service. Where exactly was the confusion, ma'am? I didn't know. I had no way to verify. You didn't verify. He let the words hang there. You assumed. Mrs. Whitmore had no response. General Hughes continued, his voice quiet but cutting. Ma'am, I've spent 3 decades leading soldiers. One thing I've learned in that time, assumptions about people based on how they look, where they live, or what you think they should be. Those assumptions are usually wrong, and they're always dangerous. He adjusted his uniform jacket slightly. I've commanded troops in combat zones. I've briefed presidents and foreign ministers. I've made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But right now, the most important thing I need to do is check on my 10-year-old son who was humiliated for telling his truth. His eyes never left hers. Where is Lucas? The classroom door opened. Principal Hayes entered first, her professional smile not quite hiding her stress. Class, we have a very special guest joining us for Career Day. Mrs. Whitmore followed, looking like she might be sick. Then General Vincent Hughes stepped through the doorway. The effect was immediate. The room went silent. Not classroom silent, cemetery silent. Every parent stood without thinking. Mr. Bennett, who regularly dined with senators, actually straightened his posture like a cadet. Dr. Carter, the surgeon, placed her hand over her heart. The military families in the room recognized the rank immediately. 4 stars. You don't see 4 stars walk into an elementary school every day. Lucas saw his father, and everything he'd been holding inside broke open. Dad! His voice was small, broken, relieved. General Hughes's professional demeanor cracked for just a moment. His eyes found his son sitting at that desk, tear-stained and exhausted. He crossed the room in 4 long strides, not caring about protocol or appearances. He knelt down to Lucas's level, right there in front of everyone, and pulled his son into his arms. I'm here, Lucas. I'm here. I'm sorry I was late. Lucas buried his face in his father's uniform and cried. Not because he was sad anymore, because he'd been holding everything in for so long, because his dad was finally here, because the truth was finally visible. The embrace lasted maybe 10 seconds. But in those 10 seconds, every person in that room understood what they'd witnessed this morning. A child telling the truth and being destroyed for it. General Hughes stood, keeping Lucas's hand in his. He turned to face the class. Good morning. I'm General Vincent Hughes, United States Army. I apologize for the disruption to your career day, but I promised my son I'd be here, and I don't break promises to my son. His voice was calm, professional, but every word carried weight. He glanced at Mrs. Whitmore, who stood near her desk looking like she wanted to disappear. Ma'am, I understand there was some question about Lucas's assignment. The room held its breath. Mrs. Whitmore opened her mouth, but no words came out. Principal Hayes stepped in. General Hughes, please. If you'd like to share with the students about your career, we'd be honored. He nodded once. Thank you. He turned back to the class, Lucas still holding his hand. My son wrote that I'm a 4-star general who's served for 32 years. Every single word of that is true. I've commanded troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've served in Korea, Germany, and across the United States. Right now, I help develop military strategy for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The students stared with wide eyes. Lucas also wrote that leadership means serving others, not yourself. He learned that by watching his mother, Dr. Angela Hughes, a pediatric surgeon, save children's lives while I was halfway around the world. He learned it by moving 8 times, by changing schools 6 times, by spending birthdays and Christmases and Thanksgivings without his father because I was deployed. He paused, looking at each student. My son didn't exaggerate in his assignment. If anything, he was modest. The truth of what military families sacrifice is harder than anything he wrote on that paper. His eyes moved to Mrs. Whitmore. When a child tells you their truth, especially when that truth is difficult or doesn't match your expectations, the first instinct should be to listen, not to assume they're lying because their truth makes you uncomfortable. The room was absolutely silent. Mrs. Whitmore's voice came out as a whisper. General Hughes, I owe Lucas an apology. A real one. She turned to face Lucas, tears streaming down her face now. Lucas, I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. I made assumptions about you and your family based on things that had nothing to do with who you are. I judged you. I didn't listen to you. I didn't believe you. And I hurt you. Her voice broke. You deserved so much better from me. You deserved to be believed. I am so sorry. Lucas looked at his father, who gave him a small nod. Your choice, son. Lucas took a breath. Mrs. Whitmore, my dad says everybody makes mistakes. He says the important thing is what you do after you make them. The wisdom in those words, coming from a 10-year-old who'd been humiliated hours earlier, hit everyone in the room. Maybe you could, believe kids more? Even when their stories sound too big to be true? I will, Lucas. Mrs. Whitmore wiped her eyes. I promise I will. Deshawn was brought back from the office. General Hughes shook his hand and thanked him for standing up for Lucas. Tyler Bennett approached Lucas afterward. I'm sorry I didn't say more earlier. That was really brave, what you did. Other students gathered around Lucas. Not with pity now, with respect. Mr. Bennett, the lobbyist, approached General Hughes. Sir, I work with members of Congress every day. What you said about listening first, I needed to hear that too. Ms. Wilson, who cleaned the Capitol building, shook the general's hand with tears in her eyes. Thank you for what you said. About service. Every kind. Principal Hayes made an announcement to the class. Effective immediately, Jefferson Elementary will be implementing comprehensive implicit bias training for all staff members. What happened this morning should never happen again. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, her hand over her heart. I'll be the first to sign up. The general then did something unexpected. From his pocket, he pulled out a small gold coin, a command coin from his unit. These were traditionally given for exceptional service. He placed it in Mrs. Whitmore's hand. I'm not giving you this for what happened this morning, ma'am. I'm giving it to you for your apology. That took real courage. Use it to remember that growth comes from our mistakes, not our successes. Mrs. Whitmore clutched the coin, nodding, unable to speak. For the next 20 minutes, General Hughes gave a presentation about military service, leadership, and sacrifice. He answered questions from curious students. He shared age-appropriate stories. He made every child feel important. And at the end, Principal Hayes suggested a class photo. Students gathered around the general. Lucas stood front and center, his hand in his father's hand, wearing the biggest smile of his life. That photo would be viral on social media within 48 hours. But right now, in this moment, it was just a son standing with his dad. Finally believed. Finally vindicated. Finally seen. That evening, the Hughes family sat together in their modest Arlington apartment, the same apartment Mrs. Whitmore had judged as proof that Lucas was lying. Dr. Angela Hughes had left surgery early when Vincent called to tell her what happened. Now she sat on the couch with Lucas tucked under her arm, still in her scrubs. General Hughes sat across from them, out of uniform now, back in jeans and a t-shirt, just a dad again. "How are you feeling, baby?" Angela asked, smoothing Lucas's hair. "Tired." Lucas leaned into his mother. "But good, I think." "What did you learn today?" his father asked. Lucas thought about it carefully. His parents had always taught him to find lessons in hard experiences. "I learned that telling the truth is really hard sometimes, especially when people don't want to believe you, but you should still do it anyway." Vincent nodded. "What else?" "That people's ideas about you can be totally wrong, but that doesn't mean you should change who you are to fit what they expect." Angela kissed the top of his head. "That's very wise, Lucas."
"But Dad—"
Lucas looked up at his father. "Yeah, son? Why didn't you just tell the school about your job before? Then this wouldn't have happened." It was a fair question, one that Vincent had been asking himself all afternoon. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Lucas, your worth has nothing to do with my rank. You're valuable because of who you are. You're kind. You're honest. You're brave. I never want you to think you need my accomplishments to matter." He paused. "But I also realize now that keeping such a low profile puts you in an impossible position. You shouldn't have had to defend your truth alone. So what happens now? Now we make sure this never happens to another kid at Jefferson Elementary, or anywhere else." 3 months passed. Jefferson Elementary looked different now, not physically, but the culture had shifted. Every staff member completed comprehensive implicit bias training. It wasn't optional. Principal Hayes made it a requirement for continued employment. The training covered racial bias, class bias, and the danger of assumptions. Real scenarios, uncomfortable conversations, necessary growth. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore attended every session. She didn't just participate, she helped lead them. In a faculty meeting 2 months after the incident, she stood in front of her colleagues and shared her experience. "3 months ago, I hurt a child because I couldn't see past my own assumptions. I looked at Lucas Hughes and decided his truth was impossible because it didn't match the picture I had in my head of what a general's family should look like." Her voice was steady now, stronger. "I've spent the last few months examining my biases, the ones I didn't even know I had. I've learned that my instincts about students were often just prejudices dressed up as experience." She held up the command coin General Hughes had given her. "I keep this on my desk, not as a trophy, as a reminder that growth comes from our mistakes, not our successes." The training led to real policy changes. New protocol: verify before questioning. If a student makes a claim about their family that seems unusual, the first step is to check with parents, not to interrogate the child. The Student Council, inspired by Lucas's experience, created the Truth and Trust initiative, a peer support system where students could talk about times they felt unheard or disbelieved. Lucas became one of the founding members. Mrs. Whitmore's classroom changed too. On the first day back after the incident, she gathered her students and created a new classroom charter. The kids helped write it. It hung on the wall now, in large letters. "In this classroom, we believe first and question respectfully. We never assume someone is lying because their truth seems impossible. Everyone's story matters." Every student signed it, even Lucas. Especially Lucas. Mrs. Whitmore also started a monthly Family Stories circle. Students could share about their families without judgment. The goal wasn't to compare or compete, just to listen and learn. During one session, Sophia Wilson talked about how her mother took pride in her cleaning work at the Capitol building, how she knew every hallway and office, how senators sometimes asked her advice about the building's history. Mrs. Whitmore listened differently now. She heard the pride in Sophia's voice instead of dismissing it as less important than other careers. Deshawn talked about how his dad could diagnose car problems just by listening to the engine, how he'd built his small mechanic shop from nothing. Tyler Bennett surprised everyone by saying his dad's lobbying job seemed less important after meeting General Hughes, that he'd started thinking about what service really meant. And Lucas? He talked about military families, about sacrifice, about the kids who move constantly and miss their parents and keep going anyway. The class listened without interruption. That's what changed most. The listening. The viral photo spread faster than anyone expected. The image of General Hughes in full dress uniform, 4 stars visible, kneeling beside his 10-year-old son while emotional students and parents looked on. The caption that went with it told the story. How a teacher had called a black student a liar for writing about his father's service. How she'd torn up his assignment. How she'd humiliated him publicly. And how a 4-star general had walked into that classroom to stand beside his son. News outlets picked it up. The story appeared on local news, then national broadcasts. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people focused on the racism, others on the classism, many on the courage it took for Lucas to stand his ground. But the most shared aspect was Mrs. Whitmore's apology and transformation. People were tired of stories where the antagonist faced consequences but never changed. This was different. This showed redemption was possible. 3 months later, Mrs. Whitmore received invitations to speak at education conferences about implicit bias. She accepted some, declined others, but always emphasized the same message. I'm not a hero of this story. I'm the cautionary tale. But I'm proof that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work. Lucas today is different from the scared 10-year-old who stood at the front of that classroom. He's more confident, still humble, still kind, but no longer afraid to share his truth. He started a peer mentoring program at Jefferson Elementary where older students help younger ones navigate difficult situations. The first rule of the program? Believe first, question with kindness. His friendship with Deshawn grew stronger. Tyler Bennett became a regular at their lunch table. Even Sophia Wilson joined their group. They called themselves the Truth Squad. Kids who committed to listening to each other's stories without judgment. General Hughes attended school events when his schedule allowed, not in uniform, just as Lucas's dad. He wanted his son to know he was proud of him for who he was, not what his father did. Dr. Angela Hughes continued saving lives at Walter Reed, but she made sure to attend every one of Lucas's presentations about military families. Because that's what this was really about. Not generals or ranks or positions, but a family that loved each other. And a son who learned that truth, even when it's hard, is always worth defending. The Hughes family went back to their quiet life, but Jefferson Elementary, and everyone who heard Lucas's story, was forever changed. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand in your truth, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong, especially then. Lucas Hughes's story is one child's experience in one classroom in Arlington, Virginia. But it represents something much larger happening in schools across America every single day. Right now, somewhere, a child is being told their truth doesn't matter because it doesn't match someone's expectations. A black student is being questioned more harshly than their white classmates. A child from a working-class family is being dismissed because adults assume they're exaggerating. A military kid is being misunderstood because people don't see the sacrifice behind their calm exterior. And most of the time, there's no 4-star general walking through the door to make it right. So the question becomes, what do we do about it? The statistics are sobering. According to the U.S. Department of Education, black students are suspended or expelled at 3 times the rate of white students for the same infractions. Subjective offenses, things like defiance or disruption, account for most of these disparities. Translation: when a teacher has to use judgment about whether a student is being disrespectful, black students are punished more severely. The same study found that 72% of teachers have never received any training in recognizing their own implicit biases. They're making decisions about children's futures based on assumptions they don't even know they have. Another study from the American Psychological Association found that black boys as young as 10 are seen as less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers. They're given less benefit of the doubt, less grace, less childhood. Lucas Hughes experienced all of this in one morning, and his story shows us the real cost. Children who feel unheard in school are 4 times more likely to disengage academically. They stop raising their hands, stop sharing their stories, stop believing their truth matters. That's the invisible damage of bias. Not just the moment of humiliation, but the slow erosion of a child's belief in themselves. But Lucas's story also shows us something else. That change is possible, that people can grow, that systems can improve when we demand better. Mrs. Whitmore could have denied what she did. She could have made excuses. She could have blamed Lucas for being too sensitive. Instead, she did the harder thing. She looked at her own biases. She apologized sincerely. She changed her classroom and her approach to teaching. That doesn't erase what she did, but it shows a path forward. Jefferson Elementary could have swept the incident under the rug. Instead, they implemented mandatory bias training. They changed their policies. They created systems to prevent it from happening again. That's how institutions improve, by acknowledging harm and taking concrete action to prevent future harm. And Lucas? He could have let that experience make him small and quiet. Instead, he started a peer mentoring program. He shared his story. He helped other kids find their voice. That's resilience. Not because trauma made him stronger, but because he chose to use his experience to help others. So, what can you do? First, ask yourself some hard questions. When someone tells you their truth, especially someone from a marginalized community, do you believe them? Or do you immediately look for reasons to doubt? When a child shares something that seems unusual or impressive, is your first instinct to celebrate them or to question whether they're exaggerating? When you see someone being treated unfairly, do you speak up? Or do you stay silent to avoid making things awkward? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Second, take action. If you're a parent, talk to your child's school about implicit bias training. Ask what policies they have to protect students from discrimination. If you're a teacher, examine your own classroom. Are you giving every student the same benefit of the doubt? Or are your assumptions affecting how you treat them? If you're just someone who heard this story and felt something, share it. Conversations change culture. The more we talk about these issues, the harder they are to ignore. And finally, teach the children in your life that their truth matters. That they don't have to shrink themselves to make adults comfortable. That standing in your truth, even when it's hard, is always worth it. General Vincent Hughes didn't walk into Jefferson Elementary that morning to humiliate a teacher. He walked in to stand beside his son, to show Lucas and every child watching that truth matters, that you matter. The question now is, what will you do with that message? Will you scroll past this story and forget it by tomorrow? Or will you let it change how you listen, how you believe, how you treat the people around you? Because here's the truth that Lucas Hughes learned at 10 years old. One person standing in their truth can change an entire system, but only if the rest of us are willing to listen. If this story moved you, do 3 things. 1. Share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this message today. 2. Comment below. Have you ever been disbelieved when telling your truth? Or witnessed someone else's truth being dismissed? Your story matters. 3. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Stories like this, about justice, redemption, and standing up for what's right, are what this channel is all about. Remember, your truth matters. You matter. Don't let anyone make you forget that.